Good morning, everyone. Today's seminar topic is imaging studies in cardiology. I'm Dr. K. Anurag, and my moderator is Dr. Subraya Hollasa. Imaging in cardiology plays a pivotal role in understanding the pathophysiological changes occurring in the heart, as it is an internal organ. Imaging studies in cardiology have come a long way, from the X-rays first discovered in 1895 to radionuclide imaging, which is discovered in the 21st century. So today we'll be discussing the following imaging modalities. They'll be classified into non-invasive imaging and invasive imaging. In non-invasive imaging, we'll have a discussion on cardiac X-rays, echocardiography, radionucleotide imaging, cardiac computed CT, and cardiac MR. In invasive imaging, we'll be discussing about coronary angiography and a brief discussion on intravascular ultrasound, optical coherence tomography, and fractional flow reserve. In each of the imaging modalities, we will be discussing the principles of imaging, the advantages, disadvantages, radiation hazards, if any, and views and role in diagnosis, followed by pictorial examples. And in cardiac X-rays, we will be going a little detailed into the approach in cardiac X-rays. Cardiac röntgenography, or simply the chest X-ray, it's a simple diagnostic utility test and is widely available. It provides a treasure trove of information and is often difficult to interpret. X-rays were first discovered in 1895 by German physicist William Röntgen, and cardiac röntgenography employs projecting ionic radiation in the forms of X-rays to get a projection film of the heart. Principles of X-rays. X-rays are generated by passing a high current across a diode which generates electrons which are targeted against an anode. And these X-rays are then projected onto an object and behind which there is a radiographic film. So the X-rays pass through a focal point and then they diverge. SID is the distance between the focal spot and then the recording medium. The resolution is improved by increasing the SID. It's a conventional standard to take the SID as 6 meters. The incident X-rays are then captured on a radiographic film or digitally. The resulting image is then converted to a grayscale and then interpreted accordingly, with air being dark, that is black, and metal being white. And in between, there's various shades of gray for fat, soft tissue, and bone. The advantages of X-ray, it is widely available with portable machines which can be used in ICUs. They are cheap compared to a CT or a cardiac MRI. It's a non-invasive, simple technique. There is no use of contrast. There's low radiation exposure compared to a CT, and it can help in the diagnosis of cardiovascular pathology along with respiratory pathology, if any. The disadvantages of X-rays are that it does not provide a 3D imaging. The bones might block the view of organs as they absorb the radiation. There are many factors which affect the imaging, such as the rotation, exposures, artifacts, which may be either due to imaging plates, and X-rays are contraindicated in pregnant women due to radiations. As X-rays are ionizing radiation, there is a potential radiation hazard. The radiation hazard for generating a PA and lateral view is minimal compared to CT and other imaging modalities in terms of a single study and in cumulative studies. In a single study, there's less than 1 millisievert radiation exposure, whereas a background annual radiation is around 6 millisieverts. The radiation exposure in pregnancy and children should be considered and is usually contraindicated because of radiation-induced cancers in the long term. Cardiac röntgenography employs three commonly used views: the PA view, AP view, and lateral view. PA view is preferred due to greater analytical detail than the AP view, and also due to the inherent nature of AP view to have apparent cardiomegaly. AP view is commonly used in case of immobile patients, especially in the ICU setting. In either the PA or AP view, which are both considered a frontal view, it is important to understand the normal anatomy of the heart. The right atrium is situated on the right heart border, with the left atrium posteriorly, and only the left atrial appendage visible as a small portion on the left heart border. The left ventricle forming the major portion of the left heart border, and right ventricle which is in the center. Two main arteries are seen: the pulmonary artery, the main pulmonary artery, which can be made out on the left heart border, and the ascending aorta and the aortic arch with the aortic knuckle seen on the left heart border. All of these structures form 7 important contours. There are 3 on the right side and 4 on the left side. The 3 on the right side are the first one is due to that of a superior vena cava and ascending aorta. This is a low density, almost straight edge visible just right to the trachea, anatomically representing the superior vena cava and the brachiocephalic vein, but in practice reflecting the size of the ascending aorta. The ascending aorta can be small, as in the case of ASD, or it can be convex outward, as in the case of aortic stenosis, aortic regurgitation, and hypertensive cardiovascular diseases. The ascending aorta should never project rightward more than the right heart border. Just below the ascending aorta is the area for the double density sign, which is seen in case of left atrial enlargement. Left atrial enlargement usually causes the double density sign, which is due to the because of 2 densities. One density is because of the normal right atrium, and the second density is due to the enlarged left atrium. The double density sign can occasionally be seen in a normal people, and hence it is always important to ascertain the straightening of the left heart border, which is caused due to enlargement of the left atrial appendage. The third important contour is that of the right atrium. The right atrium and right ventricle usually are hypertrophied together in adults. Isolated RA enlargement is rare and seen in cases of congenital tricuspid stenosis. And hence, clinically, in interpretation of chest X-rays, the right atrial contour is not considered important. On the left side, the uppermost one is due to the aortic knuckle. In normal people, the aortic knob measures 35 millimeters when measured from the lateral border of trachea to the lateral border of aortic knob. A knob greater than 35 millimeters is due to increased pressure, flow, or changes in the elasticity of the wall. Just below the aortic knob is the main or undivided segment of the pulmonary artery, as we have seen here. The measurement of pulmonary artery will be discussed in greater detail in the following slides. Then below this is the area for the left atrial appendage, which can be straightened in case of left atrial enlargement. And below that is the left ventricular contour. Whenever cardiomegaly is present, it's important to check 2 things. One, the angle of the cardiophrenic angle. In cases of LV hypertrophy, the cardiophrenic angle will be obtuse, whereas in cases of RV hypertrophy, the cardiophrenic angle tends to be more acute. The next important thing whenever cardiomegaly is present is to check for the associated arteries. As in the case of pulmonary artery will be enlarged in case of RV hypertrophy, and in case of LV hypertrophy, the ascending aorta and aortic knuckle can be seen more prominently. This is a picture depicting the lateral view of the heart and the X-ray. As we can see, the left atrium is situated more posteriorly. Hence, any enlargement in the X-ray in the posterior region suggests a left atrial enlargement. The anatomy also shows that the left ventricle is situated more posteriorly compared to the right ventricle, and the right ventricle outflow tract here with the pulmonary artery, and the arch of aorta going from the front all the way to the back. During interpretation of cardiac X-rays, a systematic approach is advised, considering the technical factors such as rotation, inspiration, position, and exposure. Non-rotated film would have an equal distance between the medial heads of the clavicle and the spinous body. An adequate inspiratory film will have at least 6 anterior ribs countable. Next, it's important to know the position if it's a lateral X-ray or a frontal X-ray, and in a frontal if it's a PA view or AP view. And then to ascertain the exposure, if it's an adequately exposed film or not. And then we look at the skeletal abnormalities, and then for the situs. Usually the fundal gas shadow should be seen on the left side below the diaphragm. Then we assess the heart, its position, its shape and size. Certain pathognomonic diagnosis can be made on the shape of the heart. For a typical boot-shaped heart, as in tetralogy of Fallot. The size, the cardiothoracic ratio is usually measured to know the size of the heart, and cardiomegaly can be made out. The different chamber enlargements can also be made out, as in the case of LV hypertrophy, we can see obtuse angle, and RV hypertrophy and acute cardiophrenic angle. And in case of a left atrial enlargement, the straightening of the left heart border, splaying of the carina, and posterior displacement of in case of a lateral X-ray. Then we look at the valves and pericardium. Sometimes the valves can be calcified, as in the case of aortic stenosis. And in case of pericardium, there might be some pericardial effusion or chronic calcific pericarditis. Uh, then we assess the great vessels, the position, shape, and size, which helps us know if there's any pulmonary venous or artery hypertension. The lung fields and vascularities by different zones, again important in assessing pulmonary venous hypertension. And certain oligemic conditions give a clue to the diagnosis, such as in case of pulmonary stenosis. Finally, we look for any valvular calcifications and implants. To differentiate between AP and PA view in a frontal X-ray, the following things are to be noted. The clavicle is usually present over the lung fields in a PA view. The scapula are seen away from the lung fields, and the posterior ribs are distinct in case of a PA view. And in AP view, there might be a relative enlargement of the heart. Measurement of cardiothoracic ratio helps us ascertain if cardiomegaly is present or not. It is measured by first drawing a midline, then measuring the distance between the rightmost side of the right heart border to the midline, then measuring the distance on the leftmost side of the heart border to the midline. Then a sum of these two is to be found out and is divided by the distance between the maximal distance in the thorax. So the sum of A plus B divided by C. If it is greater than 0.5, cardiomegaly is considered to be present. The next step, as soon as we detect cardiomegaly, is to know if it is due to a RV hypertrophy or LV hypertrophy, as I mentioned before. And it is also important to rule out an apparent cardiomegaly, as in the case of a APV. Another important aspect is measurement of the mean pulmonary artery. This is done by drawing a tangent from the peak of the aortic knuckle to the LV apex, and then measuring the distance between the tangent and the mean pulmonary artery. Usually the distance is between 0 to 15 millimeters. A distance greater than 15 millimeters is usually because of a hypoplastic pulmonary artery or due to low flow, as in the case of tetralogy of Fallot. Another important reason why this distance might be increased is because of the increase in the aortic knuckle or because of LV prominence, as in the case of atherosclerosis or HCVD, that is hypertensive cardiovascular diseases. This slide depicts a PA view X-ray and a lateral view X-ray. The PA view X-ray, which is approximately non-rotated with adequate inspiration and adequate exposure. Here we can see that the heart is in its normal position with the double density sign here. We can also see that there's an enlargement of a straightening of the left heart border with our upturned apex and the cardiophrenic angle being acute. So all these features are suggestive of left atrial enlargement with right ventricular enlargement. The left atrial enlargement also should show the splaying of the carina, here not visible. Uh, Also in the lateral X-ray, we can see that the left atrium is enlarged and also the right ventricle is prominent. So all of these are typical features of a mitral stenosis. While assessing the lung fields and vascularity, it is known that there is a good correlation between the pulmonary vascular pattern and the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure. Pressure of less than 8 mmHg, there will be normal vascularity. Whereas in cases of enlarged pressure, that is 10 to 12, the vessels in the lower zone appear less than or equal to the diameter of the vessels in the upper zone. This is known as cephalization. And when the pressure increases further, 12 to 18 mmHg, the haziness of the vessel borders are seen with the few curly B lines being seen. And finally, when the pressure is more than 18 mmHg, pulmonary edema is seen with classical batwing appearance. This is a X-ray depicting pulmonary venous hypertension, and various signs can be seen. Initially, we'll be seeing the cephalization of the vessels, which is then slowly followed by haziness of the vessels, and if untreated, peribronchial coughing, and finally Kerley lines appearance, which are seen as perpendicular lines to the pleura. If untreated, it can progress to pulmonary edema, which can be seen with the classical batwing appearance. This is another example of a person with acute pulmonary edema, as we can see by the classical batwing appearance. This is illustrated by the haziness and engorged pulmonary hyla on both the sides, and we can also see the presence of a radio-opaque marker here, which is suggestive of an intra-aortic balloon pump with balloon inflated in the descending part of the aorta. This is an X-ray film of a 70-year-old woman with a pure mitral regurgitation. The PA view is showing enlargement of the left atrium as evidenced by the straightening of the left heart border. Also note that the cardiomegaly with cardiac apex showing a obtuse angle. This is implying that it is due to left ventricular enlargement, and this is confirmed by seeing the lateral X-ray. Then below we have an X-ray which is of a 63-year-old man with chronic aortic regurgitation. The PA view is depicting the downward displaced apex with an obtuse angle again, indicating left ventricular hypertrophy. And also the right heart border, the upper part, which is supposed to be of ascending aorta, is also enlarged and is marked is deviated towards the right side. Uh, the lateral X-ray also confirms the presence of a prominent left ventricle. This is a chest X-ray of a 65-year-old woman with severe aortic stenosis. Here we can see the enlargement of the right cardiac contour, which is formed by the ascending aorta. On the lateral X-ray, we can see the calcification of the aortic valve here. This is a PA view of a 66-year-old female showing a enlarged cardiac border with a typical money bag appearance. This patient turned to have a massive pericardial effusion. This is a chest radiograph in a 45-year-old man with calcific pericarditis. This X-ray depicts the importance of getting a lateral chest X-ray. In the frontal chest X-ray, no abnormalities are present, but in the lateral X-ray, we can see thin calcifications all along the pericardium and over the pericardium as well. This is a X-ray in a child showing the typical boot-shaped appearance of the heart in tetralogy of Fallot. We can note that the apex is upturned with forming an acute cardiophrenic angle suggestive of RV hypertrophy. Also, if we measure the uh, mean pulmonary artery by drawing a tangent from the apex to the aortic knuckle, it is greater than 15 millimeters, typically seen in tetralogy of Fallot. This is a X-ray depicting the position of a pacemaker. This is a dual chamber pacemaker. This is where the pacemaker is present with the two leads, one in the right atrium and one in the left ventricle. We can see the pacing leads in the right atrium and right ventricle in the lateral X-ray. And he also has a large hiatal hernia, as we can note the air fluid level inside the chest thoracic cavity. Next emerging modality we'll be looking at is the echocardiography. This was possible by the production of ultrasonic waves using piezoelectricity, which was discovered in 1880 by Curie. Dr. Helmut Hertz and Dr. Edler were the first to use an ultrasonoscope in 1953 to examine the heart and is considered as the clinical beginning of echocardiography. Echocardiography can generate moving images with frame rates greater than 30 fps. Principles of imaging: electricity is passed through the piezoelectric crystals, which generate high frequency waves. Those are the ultrasonic waves which penetrate to various degrees in the body. The reflected waves are then captured and converted into into images in real time in grayscale. So black would indicate fluid or blood, whereas gray would be myocardium, and white for calcification of the valves and pericardium. The earlier forms of echocardiography used the M-mode imaging, in which a single ultrasound beam is displayed over time, as seen in this image here. With modern technology, multiple phased array transducers are used, and they produce images in real time with frame rates greater than 30 fps, sometimes going up to 100 fps. The M-mode, even though outdated, is still occasionally used because of its high temporal resolution. In echocardiography, the reflected waves are received at the transducers are then processed to display the image. The image can be displayed in amplitude mode or brightness mode. The A mode, which shows the amplitude of each structure, and in B mode, it is depicted with a grayscale. The older M mode is depicted with a temporally against time. The spatial resolution on echocardiography depends upon the wavelength. Smaller the wavelength, higher is the frequency, and greater is the resolution. But the depth of penetration of the ultrasound waves is reduced. And this is the reason why we use a high frequency probe in a transesophageal echocardiography. To get a higher resolution, we need a higher frequency or smaller wavelength ultrasound waves. But using the higher frequency and smaller wavelengths causes the depth of penetration to be reduced. Hence, the transducer is introduced into the esophagus using an endoscopy and to obtain a greater resolution. Nowadays, 3D USG transducers are also available, which use a waffle-like matrix array of transducers and receive a pyramidal sector of data. It is depicted here. This is the transducer with a waffle-like array and which receives a pyramidal sector of data. And it is then converted and imaged into a three-dimensional structure. In echocardiography, the Doppler principle is utilized to determine the direction and flow of blood. Using the Doppler shift in frequency of moving blood RBCs, the velocity of the flow can be found out. Using the modified Bernoulli's equation, where pressure equal to 4 times the velocity square, the pressure gradient between two chambers can be calculated by calculating the velocity between the two chambers through the valves. There are different types of Doppler USG, such as the pulse wave, which is used for relatively low flow of velocity, and it can be used to detect flow in any location of the heart. Whereas the continuous wave Doppler is used to assess high velocity flow in any direction, but it cannot locate precisely. Spectral Doppler, it is a combination of both pulsed and continuous wave, whereas a duplex scan has a B mode grayscale with a pulse wave Doppler. A color flow Doppler is when the velocity is color coded and imposed on the grayscale image, with red being towards the transducer and blue being away from the transducer. A triplex USG is one where the B mode grayscale is present, on which a spectral Doppler is also superimposed along with a color flow. In a pulsed wave Doppler, a single pulse is transmitted and then received and depicted as below. Whereas in a continuous wave Doppler, a continuous transmission of pulses will be there and it is continuously received and depicted as below. This is a tabular representation of the three main Doppler techniques. The pulsed wave, which can measure blood flow velocities at any area, but cannot measure fast flowing blood. And its clinical uses is to measure blood flow velocities through the pulmonary veins and in mitral valve and in low flow areas within the heart. Whereas a continuous wave can detect high velocities but cannot identify the location of peak velocity. This is used to measure blood flows through the aorta, aortic valve, stenotic valvular lesions, and regurgitant valvular jets. And finally, color flow, which presents the spatial relationships between the structure and blood flow. The disadvantages, like pulsed wave Doppler, it cannot measure the fast flowing velocities because of aliasing. The clinical uses is to enhance the recognition of valvular abnormalities, aortic dissections, and intracardiac shunts. These are the three modes. The first one we see A is a pulsed wave mode, whereas the B one is a continuous flow, and finally C is the color coded one, with the red being towards the transducer and blue away from the transducer. This is another depiction of the Doppler with a color flow superimposed on the grayscale with a continuous flow Doppler below. Using Doppler waveforms, we can study the systolic and diastolic functions of the heart. This is depicting the mitral inflow. During early diastole, a majority of the blood is ejected passively from the left atrium into the left ventricle. Following in the late diastole, a further amount of blood is ejected from the left atrium due to active contraction of the left atrium. This is seen in normal people. During diastolic dysfunction, the E by A ratio is reversed. This is a table depicting the different forms of measurements using Doppler. We can study the mitral inflow velocity. We can study the inflow during Valsalva maneuvers and Doppler tissue imaging of mitral annular motion, and even the pulmonary venous flow. All of these can be studied to see the normal diastolic function or as it progresses towards a more severe diastolic dysfunction. Transesophageal echocardiography, as mentioned before, the transducer is at the tip of the endoscope, which is passed from the esophagus to view the various parts of the heart in higher resolution. And this is possible by using a high frequency probe. This transesophageal echocardiography is mainly used for visualization of vegetations and intracardiac structures, intracardiac thrombi, and left atrial appendage. To the normal echocardiography, if stress is induced, we can still do a stress echocardiography testing. That is the assessment of cardiac function during exercise. This is possible either with a treadmill test or with a bicycle test. And if exercise is not possible, we can induce pharmacological stress by IV dobutamine. Another thing we can couple with the echocardiography is the use of contrast echocardiography or ultrasound enhancing agents. These agents improve the echocardiographic endocardial border delineation and provide a real-time assessment of intracardiac blood flow. The most commonly used one is agitated saline, where saline is agitated and macro bubbles are formed. This is injected IV intravenously and then echocardiography is done to see the presence of bubbles in the heart. When the bubbles are present in the right side of the heart and transfers to the left side of the heart with less than 3 to 5 beats, it suggests a right to left shunt. Whereas the bubbles appearing greater than 5 beats, it suggests a pulmonary AV shunting. And other contrast agents nowadays available are perfluorine lipid microspheres. These are fluorofluorocarbons mixed either with the lipid spheres or with albumin. And these help in endocardial border definition. The additional uses of contrast echocardiography is in alcohol septal ablation and myocardial perfusion and viability studies. So the advantages of echocardiography are that it is portable, it is cheap compared to other imaging modalities, there is no radiation, it is non-invasive, and it can study the motion of the walls, the valves, the flow of blood using Doppler, and it can measure the chamber volume and pressure gradients. We can also use transesophageal echocardiography to get high resolution images and to study the intracardiac structures. It can also be combined with stress to do stress testing. The disadvantages of echocardiography, many imaging artifacts can be present, which can be due to attenuation artifacts due to shadowing of ribs, reverberation artifacts caused by internal reflections, side lobe artifacts when the ultrasound beams are erroneously mapped, and rib dropout artifacts due to the ribs, and comet tail artifacts, which can be used diagnostically to detect interstitial fluid in lungs. Transesophageal echocardiography requires sedation and has risks of complications during the procedure, like aspiration and perforation. Stress echo is prone to complications of exercise or adverse reactions to pharmacological drugs. This is a pictorial representation of the different types of artifacts which can be present. Here we can see attenuation artifacts due to the ribs, the side lobes, side lobe artifact where they're erroneously mapped by the receiver, and then the reverberation artifacts which is caused due to internal echoes, as we can see here. These are all reverberation artifacts. Regarding radiation hazards, there is no radiation hazards and it can be safely used in pregnancy, and it can even be used to study the fetal heart. There are many different views in the transthoracic echocardiography, each to view different chambers and valves and to study different flow patterns, gradients, etc., which is much beyond the scope. What are all the uses of echocardiography? It is primarily used for the assessment of cardiac structure and function. So the chamber size, volume, pressure gradients, wall motion, and valve structure and motion can be assessed. The left ventricular systolic and diastolic functions, the LV regional wall functions, the mitral inflow patterns, pulmonary venous Doppler flow patterns. It is useful in detecting myocardial ischemia and its complications, different types of cardiomyopathies, heart failures, and in assessment of ventricular synchrony, in different types of valvular heart diseases such as mitral stenosis, regurgitation, AS, AR, and prosthetic valves, and even in pericardial diseases with effusions, hematomas, and pericarditis. Using echocardiography, we can not only imagine the heart, but we can also assess the aorta by using transesophageal echocardiography. We can detect infective endocarditis and cardiac masses and congenital heart diseases in adults such as ASD, VSD, and transposition of great arteries. This is a echocardiographic image depicting the typical uh, echo finding of a mitral stenosis. Here we can see the doming of the mitral valve, sometimes known as the hockey stick appearance. These are echocardiographic findings in different types of cardiomyopathies. Here we can see an ischemic cardiomyopathy illustrating an apical aneurysm as well as a LV thrombus here. This is a ischemic cardiomyopathy with severe MR as depicted in color Doppler. Then we have apical HCM, hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy with mid-cavity systolic obliteration. This is echo finding of a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, long axis parasternal view showing marked increases in the septal wall thickness. And here we can see the anterior movement of the mitral valve. This is an echocardiography image showing pericardial effusion as evident by pericardial collection of fluid outside the heart. This is a depiction of a pericardial tamponade. Here we can see the inversion of the RA, and here we can see the complete collapse of the RA. Echocardiography can be used to study the pulmonary vasculatures and its effects. So here we have a representation of pulmonary hypertension secondary to chronic thromboembolic disease. We can see the markedly dilated RV. Here we can see RA and RV both dilated due to pulmonary hypertension. And this is the flow pattern suggesting of severe TR with an elevated TR velocity corresponding to a calculated RV systolic pressure. The upslope of the tricuspid regurgitant is slow, indicative of poor RV ventricular contractility. With echocardiography, we can study even diseases of aorta, and this is a pictorial representation of aortic dissection. This is a true lumen, and this is a false lumen, both separated by a small flap. This is depicted here in transesophageal echocardio as well. The third imaging modality will be discussing cardiac CT. CT acquires images passing thin X-ray beams throughout the body at many different angles to generate cross-sectional images. So the X-ray is transmitted, and this is detected by a detector array and is digitalized into pixels and finally converted into an image. A grayscale is added based on the attenuation of X-rays, and bone is visualized as white and air as black and blood and muscle in different shades of gray. Along with this, iodinated contrast is required as limited contrast is there between the cardiac chambers and the vascular structures. The modern CT scanners, a 3D data set of the heart also can be acquired in 5 to 15 seconds with a sub-millimeter spatial resolution. So this is how an X-ray will be coming, and then many different X-rays are fired and is received by an array of transducers which convert the image into a three-dimensional or two-dimensional images. The importance of cardiac CT is of CT calcium scoring and CT angiography. So CT calcium scoring is a simplest application of cardiac CT. No iodinated contrast is required, and it is used to score the coronary artery calcification. And this scoring helps us to know the increased burden of atherosclerosis and the increased risk of cardiovascular mortality. The scoring is usually quantified using the Agatston score, where 0 to 10 is minimal, mild is between 10 to 100, moderate is 100 to 400, and severe is greater than 400. This calcium score is then normalized to age and then gender and represented as a percentile score. And the radiation dose for calcium scoring is very low and is around 1 to 2 millisieverts. This is around the same amount as a normal X-ray. Here we have an image depicting the calcium score as it progressively goes higher. And we can see with 1200, there is marked calcification in all the arteries. The other application of CT in cardiology is the CT coronary angiography or the CTA. This is a valuable alternative to invasive imaging in selected patients. The imaging is challenging because of the narrow luminal size and cardiac and respiratory motion. And these are tackled by using sublingual nitroglycerin just before contrast injection to tackle the narrow lumen. The respiratory movements can be reduced by breath holding, and cardiac movements can be reduced by using oral beta blockers to target a heart rate less than 60 beats per minute. The IV contrast is injected based on the weight and volume of the heart, and then image acquisition is timed with the cardiac cycle using ECG triggering. The resulting image is then post-processed using a 3D workstation. The advantages of using cardiac CT is that there is high temporal and spatial resolution. We can get a 3D data set It is a rapid acquisition, takes less than 5 to 10 minutes. It is widely available and it can be used to calculate the calcium scores, and it can be used as an alternative to invasive angiography. The disadvantages of cardiac CT is that there's a need for iodinated contrast, and there's a exposure to radiation. There's chances of severe artifacts with certain prosthetic heart valves, and the need for heart rate control and irregular heart rhythm may lead to motion artifacts. Since there is exposure to ionizing radiation, there is a radiation hazard. And since a lot of X-rays are generated, the radiation with CT is quite high. The radiation exposure with cardiac CT is variable depending upon the amount of X-rays used. With the introduction of newer technologies, there is significant dose reduction. An average CT dose, CT angiography dose would be 5 to 15 millisievert, and in selected cases, there can be as low as 1 millisievert. The ALRA principle is used, which is as low as reasonably achieved radiation. The different methods employed to reduce the amount of radiation exposure is by selecting the appropriate patients for imaging, considering the need for calcium scanning. We can omit it if it's not necessary, and the limit scan length to cardiac structures or essential structures only, and we can tailor the scanner settings, and we can use different acquisition parameters to reduce the amount of radiation exposure. The uses of cardiac CT as a diagnostic tool, we can use it to calculate the calcium scores in CT angiography, which is useful especially in the emergency department and in detection of non-calcified plaques, evaluation of coronary bypass surgery, and in imaging of coronary stents. We can also use this for ventricular and valvular morphologies and to study acute aortic syndromes and pulmonary embolism. The fourth imaging modality is cardiac magnetic resonance. A CMR is based on imaging of protons in hydrogen. The protons in different tissues interact with magnetic field at unique frequencies in MRI. A set of orthogonal gradient coils are present which are designed to locate the protons spatially so that the radio frequency pulses of energy can be delivered to the selected planes of interest. Once these pulses are stopped, the energy absorbed by the protons will be released and will be collected by phased array coils. These are then digitally recorded in a data matrix that's also known as K-space and then reconstructed into an image. There are different pulse sequences. The pulse sequences are a large array of software methods for delivering the radio frequency pulses, which are aimed at extracting different cardiac structural and physiological information. The T1 weighted images are most commonly used, and it is used to study the cardiac structure and function, the blood flow, and myocardial perfusion. Whereas T2 images are used for myocardial edema, and T2 prime weighted images are used for myocardial iron infiltration. There are many other pulse sequences which are used, which is beyond the scope of this presentation. The different contrast agents used in CMR. Currently, only gadolinium-based contrast agents are FDA approved. Once given as an IV bolus, within 15 to 30 seconds, they transit blood vessels and in the cardiac chambers. This is known as the first pass phase. Then it starts diffusing to the extracellular space. Within 10 to 15 minutes after injection, a transient equilibrium is attained between the contrast washing in and washing out to the blood pool. Then this is known as the equilibrium phase. The first pass phase is used for MR angiography, whereas the equilibrium phase is used for the late gadolinium enhancement studies. The advantages of CMR is that it produces high resolution, it has simple imaging protocols, the gadolinium contrasts are well tolerated and very rarely cause systemic nephrogenic systemic fibrosis. The CMR can assess the viability with and without stress. It is a comprehensive assessment of function, perfusion, and viability of the myocardium. There is no ionizing radiation, and it can differentiate between epicardial and endocardial processes. The disadvantages of CMR is that it's limited availability, it's high cost. Certain implants are contraindicated, such as cochlear implants and hydrocephalus shunts. It has a comparatively longer study time, and arrhythmias can cause suboptimal imaging. Claustrophobia might cause discomfort to the patient and can be alleviated by using sedation. End-stage renal disease is a contraindication for using gadolinium-based contrast agents. The use of CMR as a diagnostic tool, it can be used to study coronary artery disease. Usually, myocardial infarction is the most studied using CMR. Late gadolinium enhancement is most accurate and non-invasive method to quantify the size of the infarct. CMR is also used to assess the viability and the benefits from coronary revascularization. CMR can be used in different types of cardiomyopathies, such as hypertrophic cardiomyopathies, arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathies, different types of myocarditis, such as sarcoidosis and amyloidosis, idiopathic dilated cardiomyopathy, iron overload cardiomyopathy, as evidenced by T2 prime weighted images, and other cardiomyopathies such as Chagas disease, Takotsubo, that is apical ballooning syndrome. CMR can also be used for adult congenital heart diseases, valvular heart diseases, cardiac thrombosis, and masses. This is a late gadolinium enhancement study, and this is a patient with acute myocarditis. This is evident by the multiple patchy intensities, and also note that it is involving only the epicardium and sparing the endocardium, which helps distinguishing MI from acute myocarditis. The fifth and last non-invasive imaging modality is radionuclide imaging. These are the latest ones. These imaging modalities use small amounts of radiopharmaceuticals which are injected IV and trapped in the heart and vascular cells. The radioactivity within the heart and vascular decays are emitted by gamma rays. So the interaction between the gamma rays and detectors and specialized scanners, such as the single photon emission computerized tomography (SPECT) and positron emission tomography (PECT), creates a scintillation event or a light output, which is then captured and recorded to form an image. Like CT and CMR, radionuclide images also produce 3D views of the heart and vasculature. So this is a pictorial representation where gamma rays are emitted from the cardiac structures, and those which are perpendicular to the scanner are the ones which are captured. Those coming at different angles are not captured. And this is all, these scintillation events are then converted into an image, and the image is viewed as a 3D. Various different radiopharmaceuticals are used for radionuclide imaging. For SPECT scanning, the most commonly used is technetium-99 sestambi, uh, whereas the one used for studying cardiac sympathetic innervation is MIBG. In PET scanning, the most commonly used is rubidium-82 because of its short half-life. While studying the viability and inflammation, FDG is most commonly used. Protocols for stress myocardial perfusion. Both exercise and pharmacological stress can be used. Exercise is generally preferred as it's physiological, and measurement of clinical and hemodynamic responses is possible. Pharmacological stress can be used in patients those who are not unable to exercise or who are exercising suboptimally. Pharmacological stresses include adenosine, dipyridamole, and regadenoson or dobutamine. Generally, vasodilators are preferred, but in COPD, where vasodilators are contraindicated, dobutamine can be used. PET is alternative to SPECT, and it has a greater accuracy and lower radiation. The ultra short life of some of the PET traces is the reason that PET is combined with pharmaceutical stress instead of a natural physiological stress. PET scans are more faster than SPECT but are also more expensive, and PET scan provides an absolute measure of the myocardial perfusion, which is not possible with SPECT. When such higher imaging modalities are combined with CT, it is considered as a hybrid PET or SPECT with CT. And this is usually done for positioning of the PET scout, for correction of attenuation, for calculating the CAC scores, and CT. For evaluation of the myocardial viability in patients with ischemic cardiomyopathy, SPECT or PET is usually combined with metabolic imaging, that is FDG PET. This is a PET scan done with rubidium-82 tracer. It is done at both rest and at stress. Though there is no calcification, Agatston score 0, we see that during stress there is a reduced uptake in the anterolateral wall, suggesting that there might be some problem with the LAD. Coronary angiography was done, and there was found to be a lesion in the LAD. FDG PET can also be used for detection of infection, as depicted in this image where there's a periannular prosthetic valve endocarditis. The advantages of radionuclide imaging is that perfusion can be accurately quantified, especially in PET, and you can assess the myocardial metabolism, and it's non-invasive. The disadvantages of radionuclide imaging is that there's exposure to ionizing radiation, and it's not widely available, and it's expensive. As exposure to ionizing radiation is present, there is significant radiation hazard, but it is less than that of CT and angio. The estimated effective dose for each myocardial perfusion scan ranges from 9 millisieverts for stress-only technetium-99 test to 35 millisieverts for a dual isotope study. The role of radionucleotide imaging as a diagnostic tool is mainly for assessment of myocardial blood flow, metabolism, and ventricular function. Can be used to assess the myocardial cellular metabolism and physiology in studying stunned and hibernating myocardium. Can also be used for myocardial viability. It's used for assessment of LV function, imaging in heart failure, imaging in inflammatory and infiltrative cardiomyopathies such as sarcoidosis and amyloidosis, and imaging in cardiac device and prosthetic valve infection. In developed countries, it also has a role in disease detection, risk stratification, and clinical decision making. Even in patients with preclinical coronary artery disease, the risk stratification can be done in such asymptomatic subjects. It can also be used in patients, stable patients with chest pain, patients with established CAD, and acute coronary syndromes. This is a case scenario in which a patient presented with shortness of breath, gingival hyperplasia, and bifid thoracic ribs. The echocardiography done was showing a large myocardial mass. So CMR was done and showed that there's a large myocardial mass involving the anterolateral portion of the heart. The late gadolinium enhancing study was done, and there is found to be intense uptake of the contrast agent, and this is proved to be a cardiac fibroma. And with the clinical picture, it fits into Gorlin syndrome. In invasive cardiac imaging, coronary angiography is the most widely performed. It was first performed in 1959 by Mason Sones. Angiography is achieved by cardiac catheterization and injection of radio-opaque dye directly into the coronary arteries and recording the high-resolution digital angiograms, which are exportable on radiographic medium. It's considered the gold standard imaging for coronary artery disease. There are various indications and contraindications for angiography. Elective cardiac catheterization risks are very low, with less than 0.1% risk for MI on table and less than 0.01 risk for stroke and less than 0.1% for death. Advantage of coronary angiography is that it's most reliable anatomic information in CAD. Can do PCI in the same sitting if lesions are found and treatable. High spatial resolution, and we get real-time images. Disadvantages of angiography are that there's high radiation exposure amongst all the imaging modalities. It is invasive and associated with complications such as vascular access site bleeding, contrast allergy seen in less than 5% of the patients, and contrast-induced AKI seen in up to 2 to 7% of the patients. Intravascular ultrasound, it is used whenever there's a discrepancy or there's an intermediate stenosis or indeterminate findings and anatomic findings incongruence with symptoms which require further investigation. So it provides a more accurate anatomical assessment and the degree of coronary atherosclerosis. It involves the use of a 40 millihertz transducer at the tip of a catheter, which is advanced over a guide wire into the coronary artery. It helps to image the plaque and determine the luminal cross section and measure the vessel size. In follow-ups, assessment of stenosis and to determine the adequacy of stent placement. Here, a coronary angiography was done, which is showing stenosis, some filling defects in images C and B, with a significant filling defect in D. Intravascular ultrasound is done. A is showing a normal coronary cross section. B and C are showing an eccentrically placed plaque here and here. And D is almost showing critical stenosis. OCT is a catheter-based imaging technique that uses near-infrared light to generate images with better spatial resolution than IVUS. The depth of the field is smaller than IVUS, but advantages are the ability to generate images which are characteristic of atherosclerotic plaque with high definition and to assess coronary stent placement with apposition and patency. Here you can see a normal coronary artery followed by one with a fibrous plaque, one with a lipid plaque, one with thrombus in the vessel, and here we can see multiple struts of a stent. Measurement of fractional flow reserve. This is a functional assessment of stenosis and is more accurate than imaging to predict long-term clinical outcome. The FFR is a ratio between the pressure in the coronary artery distal to the stenosis divided by pressure in the artery proximal to the stenosis at maximal vasodilation following injection of adenosine. So FFR less than 0.80 is hemodynamically significant lesion and it benefits from intervention. Similarly, we can get myocardial resistance using the other variables and is an important predictor of outcome. This is how the pressure gradients in FFR are depicted. The one in green depicts the pressure distal to the stenosis and one in red depicts proximal to the stenosis, and FFR is found to be 0.78 in this picture. In conclusion, imaging in cardiology has many advancements with many different imaging modalities for different pathological processes. Radiation exposure of imaging is to be considered before ordering a test, and always the risk benefit of the patient, the cost factors, the time consumption, availability of the test, and the clinical setting should always be considered before we order a test. This is a graphical representation of the radiation exposure in different procedures. We can see that the average annual dose of background radiation is around 6 millisieverts, with maximum radiation exposure in angioplasty and angiogram, followed by second maximum in cardiac CT and dual inotrope stress test. Single inotrope stress test has coming around third place. Chest X-ray is the least with just 1 millisievert exposure. My main references are Braunwald's Heart Disease, a textbook of cardiovascular medicine, and Harrison's 20th edition. Thank you for your attention.